Ethan Cole dropped to his knees in the dirt and pressed his forehead against the grave marker he'd carved himself. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry timber. "I couldn't save any of you." 8 years of running. 8 years of sleeping with one eye open, waiting for the guilt to finally kill him. He'd come to New Mexico to disappear, maybe to die. But the desert had other plans, because somewhere beyond those sun-scorched rocks, a woman was laughing. And that sound would change everything. If you want to see how a broken man finds his way back to life, subscribe now and stay until the end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. The canteen had been empty for 2 days. Ethan Cole's horse stumbled beneath him, and he didn't bother correcting the animal. What was the point? They were both running on borrowed time anyway. The New Mexico sun beat down without mercy, turning the air itself into something that burned the lungs with every breath. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, his voice rough from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to another human being. A week two time had a way of bleeding together when you stopped caring about calendars. His hand moved instinctively to the worn leather pouch at his belt. Inside were 3 things: a tarnished wedding ring that had never touched a bride's finger, a folded letter he'd read so many times the creases had worn through, and a single bullet. The bullet was for him. Had been for 3 years now. He just hadn't found the right moment to use it. "Reckon today might be the day," he said to no one. The horse nickered weakly, and Ethan felt a pang of guilt. The animal didn't deserve to die out here because its rider had given up on living. "All right," he sighed, scanning the horizon. "Let's find you some water first. Then we'll talk about the rest." He'd been a cavalry scout once, before the war, before the things he'd done and the things he'd failed to do. Finding water in hostile territory used to be second nature. Now it felt like trying to remember a language he'd forgotten. But some skills don't die even when you want them to. His eyes caught the faint green tinge on the rocks to the east. Moss, which meant moisture, which meant water couldn't be far. He turned the horse toward the color and let instinct take over. The creek was barely more than a trickle, but it was there. Ethan slid from the saddle and let his horse drink first, watching the animal's desperate gulps with something that might have been envy. "At least one of us still wants to live," he muttered. He knelt beside the water, cupping his hands to drink, when the sound hit him like a physical blow. Laughter. Not the cruel laughter of men who'd done terrible things. Not the hollow laughter of saloon girls pretending to enjoy the company of strangers. This was something else entirely. Something pure and unrestrained and utterly inappropriate for the middle of nowhere. Ethan's hand went to his revolver before he could think. 8 years of survival instincts didn't care about the quality of a laugh. He moved along the creek bed, keeping low, his boots silent against the rocks. The laughter continued, punctuated by splashing and what sounded like creative cursing. "Oh, for heaven's sake! Of all the ridiculous—" More laughter. "Clara Whitmore, you absolute fool!" Ethan rounded a bend of rocks and stopped dead. A young woman stood waist-deep in a pool of thick brown mud, her arms raised above her head, as if surrendering to an invisible army. Her dress, what he could see of it, might have been blue once. Now it was the color of the earth that held her prisoner, and she was laughing. Laughing so hard, tears streamed down her mud-spattered face. "Ma'am." The word came out before he could stop it. She spun toward him, or tried to. The mud held her fast, and the motion only sent her deeper. This apparently was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. "Oh!" She pressed a muddy hand to her chest, still giggling. "A witness to my magnificent humiliation. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." Ethan didn't move. His hand remained on his revolver, his eyes scanning the surrounding rocks for threats. "You alone out here? As you can see, I'm not exactly in a position to be entertaining company." She gestured at her predicament with mud-caked fingers. "Unless you count the very persistent frog who's been judging me for the past hour." Frog. Somewhere to my left. Green fellow. Very disapproving expression. She attempted to turn again and sank another inch. Oh, that's not good. That's not good at all. But she was still laughing. Ethan had seen men face death before. He'd seen them scream, beg, pray, curse. He'd seen them go silent with shock or wild with desperation. He'd never, not once in all his years, seen someone laugh while sinking into the earth. Ma'am, you're stuck in quickmud. Am I? She looked down at herself as if noticing for the first time. Well, that explains a great deal. I thought I'd simply become very popular with the local clay deposits. You could die. I could. She nodded thoughtfully. But then again, I could also have died 6 times before breakfast this week. Life in the territory, you know. Very dramatic. Something cracked inside Ethan's chest. Something that had been frozen solid for longer than he cared to remember. Hold still, he said, already moving toward a fallen branch near the water's edge. Don't struggle. You'll only sink faster. Yes, I discovered that particular truth about 20 minutes ago. Right around the time my left boot decided to seek its fortune in the center of the earth. Ethan positioned himself on solid ground at the edge of the mud pool. The branch was long enough to reach her barely. He extended it toward her hands. Grab on. Don't pull, just hold. I'll do the rest. She wrapped her fingers around the wood, her grip surprisingly strong. I should warn you, I'm apparently heavier than I look. Or the mud is very affectionate. Hard to say which. Ma'am? Clara. She met his eyes, and the laughter faded just enough to let something else through. Something real. If you're going to save my life, you should probably know my name. Clara Whitmore. Ethan Cole. Pleasure to meet you, Ethan Cole. Though I admit I'd hoped to make a better first impression. He braced his boots against a rock and began to pull. The mud protested, making obscene sucking sounds as it reluctantly released its prize. That's a horrible noise, Clara observed conversationally. Like the earth is personally offended that I'm leaving. Can you stop talking for 1 minute? I could, but I find that talking prevents me from panicking, and panicking seems counterproductive to the current endeavor. Another pull. The mud released its grip on her hips with a sound like a cork leaving a bottle. There we go. Clara was grinning now, genuine delight replacing the defensive humor. I can feel my legs again. That's promising. One more heave and she came free, entirely stumbling forward onto solid ground. She would have fallen face first into the rocks if Ethan hadn't caught her. For a moment, just a moment, she was in his arms, covered in mud, smelling of swamp water and something faintly herbal, completely undignified, and still smiling. Thank you, she said softly. Truly. Ethan released her like she was made of fire. You shouldn't be out here alone. No, I shouldn't. She began attempting to scrape mud from her dress, a futile effort that only spread it around. But the feverfew only grows near this creek, and Mrs. Henderson's headaches won't cure themselves. Feverfew. An herb. For medicine. She paused in her scraping to look at him properly for the first time. Her eyes were green, he noticed, the color of the moss that had led him to water. I'm an herbalist, or trying to be. My teacher died last winter, so now I'm learning by trial and error. She gestured at the mud pool. Mostly error, apparently. Where's your horse? About a mile back. She doesn't like mud. Clara's mouth twitched. Sensible creature. We should all take lessons from her. Ethan stared at her. The woman had nearly died. She'd lost her boots, ruined her dress, and had been trapped alone in quickmud for God knew how long, and she was cracking jokes about her horse's preferences. You're not right in the head, he said finally. Clara's laugh rang out again, bright and warm. Oh, I know. I decided years ago that sanity was overrated. She began wringing water from her hair. The choice seemed to be go mad with grief or go mad with joy. I chose joy. Much better for the complexion. The words hit Ethan somewhere deep, somewhere he'd walled off with stone and silence. Grief for what? The question came out before he could stop it. Clara's hand stilled in her hair. For a moment the laughter left her eyes entirely, and he saw something else there. Something old and heavy and far too familiar. Everyone, she said simply. My parents, my brothers, half the town I grew up in. Cholera doesn't discriminate, Mr. Cole. It takes the people you love and leaves you standing in the wreckage wondering why you survived when they didn't. Ethan's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 7 years ago. The smile returned softer now. I spent the first 2 years crying. Then I spent a year being angry. Then I realized something important. What's that? They're not coming back. No amount of tears or rage will change that. She met his eyes with a directness that made him want to look away. But I'm still here. And every day I spend drowning in sorrow is a day I waste the life they don't get to live anymore. She said it simply like she was discussing the weather. But Ethan heard the years of struggle behind those words. The countless nights of choosing to get up when staying in bed would have been easier. The daily battle against a grief that never fully left. That's... He couldn't find the word. Insane, naive, hopelessly optimistic. Clara shrugged, still dripping mud. Probably all three. But I find it works for me. She tilted her head, studying him with uncomfortable intensity. You've lost people too. It wasn't a question. What makes you say that? The way you look at me, like you can't decide if I'm a miracle or a hallucination. She stepped closer, leaving muddy footprints on the rocks. And the way your hand keeps touching that pouch at your belt. Whatever's in there, it hurts to carry. Ethan's fingers jerked away from the leather. You don't know anything about me. No. Clara agreed easily. But I know that look. I wore it for 2 years. She gestured toward the creek. My horse is tethered near the big cottonwood. I don't suppose you'd be willing to escort a mud-covered disaster back to town. I promise I'm much better company when I'm not being slowly digested by the earth. Every instinct Ethan had developed over 8 years of isolation screamed at him to refuse. To mount his horse ride in the opposite direction and never think about green eyes and inappropriate laughter again. Which town? He heard himself ask. Dry Creek, about 2 hours that way. She pointed vaguely northeast. It's not much to look at, but Mrs. Patterson makes exceptional pie, and the people only gossip behind your back, never to your face. Very civilized. And you live there. I have a small cabin at the edge of town, left to me by my teacher. A shadow crossed her face. Martha was the closest thing I had to family after the cholera. She took me in, taught me everything she knew about healing. Said I had gentle hands. What happened to her? Winter fever. Ironic, isn't it? A healer who couldn't heal herself. Clara's voice remained steady, but Ethan saw her hands tremble slightly. She went peacefully at least. Said she was going to see her husband again. The smile returned watery, but present. I hope she was right. Something in Ethan shifted. A wall that had stood for 8 years developed its first crack. My horse needs rest, he said gruffly. And water, and probably a meal that isn't scrub grass. Clara's face lit up. Is that a yes to the escort? It's a yes to not leaving you to stumble home alone in your condition. I'll take it. She began squelching toward the path, her remaining dress making sounds that shouldn't have been possible from fabric. Fair warning, I talk when I'm nervous. And nearly dying makes me very nervous. So you're going to hear a lot about herbal medicine, whether you want to or not. Can't wait, Ethan muttered. But as he followed her toward the cottonwood where her horse waited, he realized something strange. The weight he'd been carrying, the one that had pressed on his chest for years, felt lighter. Not gone, not even close to gone, but lighter. All because a woman stuck in mud had chosen to laugh instead of scream. They found Clara's horse exactly where she'd set a sturdy bay mare with the patient expression of an animal used to its owner's misadventures. Bessie. Clara approached the mare with obvious affection, mud and all. I told you I'd be back, though I admit the circumstances are more dramatic than planned. The horse snorted, which Clara seemed to interpret as affection. She doesn't like you, Ethan observed. She's disappointed in my life choices. Very different emotion. Clara reached for her saddlebag and produced a somewhat crushed apple. But she'll forgive me. She always does. Ethan watched her feed the mare, struck again by the strangeness of this woman. She'd lost everything family home mentor, and yet here she was naming her horse Bessie and feeding it apples and laughing at her own near-death experience. "You keep staring," Clara said without turning around. "Is there mud on my face?" "There's mud on my face, isn't there? There's mud everywhere." "How do you do it?" She turned then, apple core still in hand. "Do what?" "Keep?" He gestured vaguely. "This, all of this, the laughing, the jokes, after everything you've been through." Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more serious. "Do you know what my mother said to me the night before she died?" Ethan shook his head. "She was delirious with fever, could barely open her eyes, but she grabbed my hand and she said, 'Clara, promise me you'll find something to laugh about every single day, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.'" Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I was 15 years old watching my mother die, and she spent her last breath teaching me how to survive. That's—" Ethan's voice failed him. "It's the only inheritance I have. The only thing the cholera couldn't take." Clara tucked the apple core into her pocket. "So, yes, I laugh. I laugh at mud puddles and disapproving frogs and handsome strangers who appear out of nowhere to save my life. Because every laugh is a promise kept. Every smile is proof that my mother's last lesson wasn't wasted." Handsome strangers. Ethan caught the words, but didn't know what to do with them, so he filed them away with all the other things about this woman that didn't make sense. "We should move," he said gruffly. "Sun's getting low." Clara mounted her horse with surprising grace, given her mud-caked condition. "Ethan Cole." "What?" "Thank you. Not just for pulling me out." She gathered her reins, looking down at him with those impossible green eyes. "For listening. Most people change the subject when I talk about my family. You didn't." "Nothing to thank me for?" "There is, but I won't argue." She nudged her horse forward. "Now come on. I promised you horrible stories about medicinal herbs, and I always keep my promises." The ride to Dry Creek took longer than 2 hours. Clara's estimate hadn't accounted for her constant detours to point out plants. That's yarrow excellent for wounds, or her tendency to ask questions that cut straight to the bone. "So where are you from originally?" "Ethan Cole, Virginia." "That's a long way from New Mexico." "Yes." "Running from something, or toward something?" He didn't answer. Clara nodded as if he had. "Running from then. That's all right. Most people out here are running from something. The territory doesn't judge." The sun was touching the horizon when the town came into view. Dry Creek was exactly what its name suggested. A handful of buildings clustered around a creek bed that probably only held water in spring. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a church with a crooked steeple. "Home sweet home," Clara announced. "Population 63, 64 if you count Mr. Peterson's ghost, which I personally do. He's very polite for a haunting." "There's no such thing as ghosts." "That's what Mr. Peterson said right before he became one. Very embarrassing for him." Despite himself, Ethan felt his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, he'd forgotten how to do those, but close. Clara noticed immediately. "Was that almost a smile? I think that was almost a smile. I'm counting it as a victory." "It wasn't?" "It absolutely was. I have witnesses." She gestured at the empty street ahead. "Well, potential witnesses. Hypothetical witnesses." They stopped in front of a small cabin at the town's edge, set apart from the other buildings by a sprawling garden that seemed to contain more plant species than Ethan could count. "This is me." Clara dismounted, landing with a splat that reminded everyone present of her muddy condition. "Would you?" She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I should offer you dinner, as a thank you, for saving my life, but I should also probably clean myself first, and you probably have places to be, and I don't." She blinked. Don't what? Have places to be. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. But they were true. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan Cole had nowhere he needed to go, nothing he needed to run from or toward. Oh. Clara's face did something complicated. Well, in that case, give me an hour to become presentable, and I'll cook you the finest meal my meager supplies can provide. Which will probably be beans. I should warn you now, there will definitely be beans. I like beans. Then you've come to the right place. She started toward her door, then turned back. Ethan. Yeah. I'm glad you found me. In the mud, I mean. She smiled, and there was nothing defensive about it now. Nothing hiding behind humor. I think maybe you were supposed to. She disappeared inside before he could respond. Ethan stood in the fading light, holding his horse's reins, staring at a closed door covered in climbing vines. The bullet in his pouch suddenly felt heavier than it had in months. Heavier and more wrong. Reckon today's not the day after all, he said quietly. His horse snorted in what might have been agreement. Ethan tied both animals to the post and settled onto the porch step to wait. The sun finished its descent, painting the sky in colors he hadn't bothered to notice in years. Somewhere inside the cabin, he could hear Clara humming. It was the first peaceful sound he'd heard in 8 years, and God help him, he wanted to hear it again. The beans were terrible. Ethan ate 3 helpings anyway, watching Clara move around her small kitchen with the kind of restless energy that suggested she rarely sat still. She'd changed into a clean dress, pale yellow practical, and scraped most of the mud from her hair, though a streak of brown still clung to her left temple. You've got, he gestured vaguely at his own face, mud still. She laughed and rubbed at her temple with her sleeve. I swear that creek is determined to claim me. Better, mostly. She sat down across from him, chin propped on her hand. So, Ethan Cole from Virginia. What brings a man 800 miles from home to the middle of nowhere? Could ask you the same thing. I already told you. Cholera, dead family, inherited cabin. She ticked each item off on her fingers. Your turn. Ethan set down his spoon. The easy thing would be to lie. He'd done it 100 times before, in 100 different towns. Different name, different story, different past. But something about those green eyes made lying feel wrong. War, he said finally. I was a scout. Confederate cavalry. Clara's expression didn't change. That was a long time ago. 15 years feels like yesterday. What happened? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. I did things. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Followed orders I shouldn't have followed. Watched men die because I was too slow, too scared, too... He stopped. Doesn't matter. When it was over, I couldn't go home. Couldn't face the people who remembered who I used to be. So you ran. I survived. There's a difference. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. Just a brush of fingers light as a bird landing. There's also a difference between surviving and living, Ethan. I had to learn that the hard way. He should have pulled away. Should have stood up, thanked her for the meal, and ridden out before dawn. That's what he'd done in every other town, with every other person who got too close. Instead, he turned his hand over and let her fingers rest against his palm. How? The word came out broken. How do you learn that? One day at a time, one choice at a time. Her thumb traced a small circle on his skin. You choose to get up, choose to eat, choose to help someone even when it's hard, choose to laugh even when it hurts. And that works. Not always. Some days I fail. Some days the grief wins and I stay in bed and cry until there's nothing left. She met his eyes without shame. But then the next day comes, and I choose again. That's all any of us can do. The candle between them flickered, casting dancing shadows on her face. Ethan realized he was still holding her hand. Realized he didn't want to let go. I should find a place to sleep, he said, not moving. There's a boarding house. Mrs. Finch runs it. She's mostly deaf, which means she won't ask questions. Clara's lips curved. Or you could sleep in my barn. Bessie would appreciate the company. The barn's fine. I'll get you blankets. She stood, and his hand felt suddenly empty. Cold. He watched her gather bedding from a chest in the corner, her movements quick and efficient. Clara. She turned blankets in her arms. Yes, thank you, for the meal, and the... He gestured vaguely, encompassing the evening, the conversation. Everything he couldn't put into words. You're welcome, Ethan Cole. She handed him the blankets, her fingers brushing his again. Sleep well. Try not to let Bessie steal your boots. She has a weakness for leather. He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. Ethan? There's a ranch about 3 miles east, the Double Bar. I heard Tom Garrett mention he's looking for hands. She paused. In case you were thinking about staying. He should have said no, should have explained that he never stayed anywhere, that the longest he'd been in one place in 8 years was 2 weeks. That staying meant roots, and roots meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. I'll think about it, he said instead. Clara's smile could have lit the whole territory. Yeah, he didn't sleep. The barn was warm enough, and Bessie proved to be a surprisingly considerate roommate. But every time Ethan closed his eyes, he saw green eyes and mud-spattered laughter, and a hand reaching for his across a rough wooden table. Dawn found him sitting against the barn wall, watching the sky turn from black to purple to pink. The bullet in his pouch had never felt heavier. He pulled it out and held it up to the growing light. Such a small thing. An ounce of lead that had been his companion for 3 years, waiting patiently for the moment he'd finally give up. That's a strange thing to be admiring at sunrise. Ethan's hand closed around the bullet. Clara stood in the barn doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, a steaming cup in each hand. Coffee, she said, as if finding a man contemplating a single bullet was perfectly normal. I thought you might need some. He tucked the bullet back into his pouch and accepted the cup. You're up early. I'm always up early. Best time to gather herbs. The dew does something to the oils, makes them more potent. She settled onto a hay bale across from him. Plus, I wanted to catch you before you disappeared. Who says I'm disappearing? Experience. She sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim. Men like you don't stay. You blow through towns like tumbleweeds, never stopping long enough to put down roots. Men like me. Haunted men. Running men. Men who think they don't deserve to stop. Her voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. I've seen a few pass through Dry Creek. They never stay. Ethan stared into his coffee. Maybe I'm different. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. Or maybe you'll ride out today, and I'll never see you again, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to the man who pulled me out of the mud. Would that bother you? The question surprised them both. Clara set down her cup. Yes, it would bother me very much. Something crackled in the air between them. Something dangerous and fragile and completely unexpected. That ranch you mentioned, Ethan said slowly. The Double Bar. How do I get there? Clara's face transformed. You're staying? I'm thinking about it. She launched herself off the hay bale and threw her arms around him before he could react. Coffee sloshed everywhere. Bessie snorted in alarm. Ethan sat frozen, a woman pressed against his chest for the first time in longer than he could remember. Sorry, Clara pulled back, her cheeks flushed. Sorry, I'm a hugger, when I'm happy, which is often. Martha always said it would get me in trouble. It's fine. His voice sounded strange, strained. It's fine. Right. Good. Well. She smoothed her dress, avoiding his eyes. The Double Bar is east. Follow the main road until you see the windmill. Can't miss it. Clara, I should go. Herbs to gather, people to heal. Very busy schedule for a frontier herbalist. She was already backing toward the door. Good luck with Mr. Garrett. He's gruff but fair. Don't let him intimidate you. She was gone before he could respond. Ethan sat in the barn covered in spilled coffee and realized he was smiling. Actually smiling. For the first time in 8 years. Tom Garrett was built like a brick wall and had the personality to match. "Can you ride?" "Yes, sir." "Can you rope?" "Yes, sir." "Can you follow orders without asking stupid questions?" "Yes, sir." Garrett squinted at him. "You ex-military?" Ethan hesitated. "Confederate cavalry. Scout." "Huh." Garrett spat into the dirt. "I was Union infantry. 2nd Ohio." The silence stretched. Ethan waited for the dismissal, the curse, the fist. Instead, Garrett shrugged. "War's over. I need hands. You start tomorrow, $5 a week plus meals. Bunkhouse is behind the main barn. Any trouble, any drinking, any fighting, and you're out. Clear?" "Clear." "Good." Garrett turned back toward the house, then paused. "How'd you hear about the job?" "Clara Whitmore mentioned it." Something shifted in Garrett's weathered face. Something almost like warmth. "Clara sent you?" "Yes, sir." "Then you must be all right." He actually smiled, a small grudging thing, but real. "That girl saved my wife's life last winter. Fever that should have killed her. Clara sat with her for 3 days straight, wouldn't leave her side." He shook his head. "Anyone Clara vouches for is good enough for me." Ethan filed that information away, adding it to the growing collection of things he was learning about the woman who'd laughed in the mud. The first week at the Double Bar was hell. Ethan's body had grown soft during years of drifting. Muscles that had once been iron screamed in protest at the work. His hands, accustomed to holding nothing heavier than reins, blistered and bled and blistered again. But he didn't quit. Every evening he'd ride the 3 miles back to town, telling himself it was to check on his horse, which he'd stabled at the livery. In truth, he was looking for a glimpse of yellow dress and brown hair. He found her on the 4th day. Clara was in her garden arguing with a plant. "I gave you water. I gave you sunlight. I composted Mrs. Patterson's rabbit droppings specifically for you, which was disgusting, by the way." She poked at a drooping herb with her finger. "The least you could do is not die. Does yelling at it help?" She spun around, her frown transforming into a grin. "Ethan, you're still here. Told you I'd think about it. You did." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him, her eyes traveling over his face, his clothes, his bandaged hands. "You look terrible." "Thanks." "No, I mean—" She reached out and took his hands, turning them over to examine the blisters. "Tom Garrett is working you too hard. These need attention." "They're fine. They're infected. Come inside." She was already pulling him toward the cabin. "I have a salve that will help. And before you argue, remember that I saved you from having to eat more of my terrible beans." "The beans weren't that bad." "The beans were awful, and we both know it." She pushed him into a chair and began rummaging through jars on her shelf. "Cooking was never my strength. Martha tried to teach me, but I have a gift for burning things." "Is there anything you're not good at?" The question came out wrong, too warm, too intimate. Clara paused, her back to him. "Plenty of things," she said softly. "I'm terrible at being serious, at sitting still, at keeping my mouth shut when I should." She turned a small clay pot in her hands. "And I'm apparently awful at not caring about people I barely know." She knelt beside his chair and began applying the salve to his blisters. Her touch was gentle, practiced, professional. But Ethan felt each brush of her fingers like a brand. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "Do what? Care about people. After everything you've lost." Clara's hands stilled. "Because it's the only thing that makes sense." "How does caring make sense? It just means more chances to hurt." "Maybe." She resumed her work, her eyes focused on his hands. "But the alternative is being alone. And I spent enough time alone in the years after the cholera. Enough time building walls and pushing people away and convincing myself that if I didn't love anyone, I couldn't lose anyone." "What changed?" "Martha." Clara's voice caught slightly. "She found me half-starved in an abandoned cabin 3 towns over. I'd been alone for almost a year, barely surviving. She took one look at me and said, "Child, you're not living, you're just dying slowly." Ethan's chest tightened. She dragged me home, fed me, taught me everything she knew about herbs and healing. Clara wrapped a clean bandage around his palm. And she loved me, even when I was prickly and mean and tried to push her away. She just kept loving me until I remembered how to love back. And then she died. And then she died. Clara tied off the bandage and looked up at him. But she didn't take my ability to love with her. That's still here, still working. And I've decided that's more important than protecting myself from pain. Their faces were inches apart. Ethan could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the faint freckles across her nose, the small scar on her chin that he hadn't noticed before. "You're braver than me," he said roughly. "No, I'm just more stubborn." She stood abruptly, turning away. "Keep those bandages clean, change them every morning, and tell Tom Garrett that if he works you this hard again, I'll dose his coffee with laxatives." Ethan laughed. The sound startled them both. "Was that?" Clara spun around, her eyes wide. "Did you just laugh?" "No." "You did. You absolutely did." She was grinning now, delighted. "I knew there was a human being under all that brooding silence." "I don't brood. You brood constantly. You brood like it's a profession. Professional brooder Ethan Cole." She was practically bouncing. "But you laughed? That's progress. That's—" He kissed her. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it. One moment she was teasing him, her face bright with joy, and the next his hands were cupping her face and his mouth was on hers. She tasted like herbs and honey and something uniquely Clara. For one perfect moment, she melted into him. Her hands gripped his shirt. A small sound escaped her throat. Then she pulled back. "Ethan, I'm sorry." He released her immediately, his heart pounding. "I shouldn't have. I didn't mean. Stop." She pressed a finger to his lips. Her own were swollen, her cheeks flushed. "Don't apologize. Just, not yet. Not yet. I barely know you. You barely know yourself right now." Her eyes searched his face. "I don't want to be a port in a storm, Ethan. I don't want to be the woman you turn to because you're lost and lonely, and I was convenient." The words stung because they were fair. "That's not what this is." "Are you sure?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "Because a week ago, you were ready to die in the desert. That's not nothing. That's not something you get over because a pretty girl smiled at you. You're more than a pretty girl." "I know." She smiled sadly. "But you need to figure out what you want, not just react to what's in front of you." She stepped back, putting distance between them. "Stay in Dry Creek. Work for Tom. Find out who you are when you're not running. And then ask me to dinner. Properly, like a gentleman." Her smile gained some warmth. "I've heard that's what civilized people do." Ethan stared at her. This woman who'd nearly died in mud and laughed about it. Who'd lost everything and chose joy. Who kissed like fire and then demanded he earn the right to do it again. "You're the most confusing person I've ever met." "Thank you. I work very hard at it." She opened the cabin door. "Now go, rest those hands, and think about what I said." He walked to the door, then turned back. "Clara." "Yes." "I'm going to ask you to dinner, properly." "I'm counting on it." The door closed behind him. Ethan stood on her porch as the sun set, his lips still tingling, his heart doing something strange in his chest. For the first time in 8 years, he had something to look forward to. 3 weeks passed. Ethan's hands healed. His muscles stopped screaming. He learned the rhythms of the double bar, the early mornings, the long days, the satisfaction of honest work. And every Sunday, he found reasons to be in town. The first Sunday, he bought new boots at the general store. Clara happened to be there buying flour. "Those are good boots," she said approvingly. "Very practical." "I'm a practical man." "No, you're not. You're a dramatic man pretending to be practical." She tucked her flour under her arm. "But I appreciate the effort." The second Sunday he attended church. Not because he believed he'd given up on that in the war, but because Clara was there singing hymns in a voice that wasn't quite on key, but made up for it in enthusiasm. "You came to church," she said afterward, surprised. "Seemed like the thing to do." "You looked like you were in physical pain during the sermon. Reverend Morrison is very thorough." She laughed, and the sound wrapped around him like sunlight. The third Sunday he finally asked, "Dinner." Clara looked up from her garden. "What?" "Dinner, with me. Tomorrow night." He shifted his weight, feeling like a schoolboy instead of a 38-year-old man. "Mrs. Patterson's place. I hear she makes good pie." "She does make good pie." Clara's eyes sparkled. "Are you asking me properly, Ethan Cole?" "I'm trying." "Well." She stood brushing dirt from her knees. "In that case, I accept." The dinner was a disaster. Not because of the food. Mrs. Patterson's chicken was excellent, and her pie was transcendent. Not because of the company. Clara was brilliant and funny, and made Ethan feel like he might actually be worth talking to. The disaster walked through the door halfway through dessert. Well, well, if it isn't the little orphan playing house. Clara's face went pale. The man was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of handsome features that suggested he knew exactly how good-looking he was. He stood in the doorway of Mrs. Patterson's dining room, like he owned the place. "Victor?" Clara's voice was flat. Dead. "Miss Whitmore." He swept off his hat in a mocking bow. "I heard you were still in this godforsaken town. Thought I'd pay my respects. We have nothing to say to each other. Now. Is that any way to treat an old friend?" Victor's eyes slid to Ethan. "And who's this another charity case you've picked up?" Ethan stood, slowly, the kind of slow that gave a man time to reconsider his choices. "Name's Cole, and you are Victor Crane." The name was delivered like a title. "Clara and I have history." "We have nothing." Clara was on her feet now, trembling. "You have nothing. I made that clear 3 years ago." "Ah, yes, when you chose that old woman over me. How did that work out, by the way?" Victor's smile was cruel. "Oh, that's right. She died." Ethan moved without thinking. His fist connected with Victor's jaw before either of them could react. The man stumbled backward, crashing into a table, sending plates and glasses shattering to the floor. "Ethan!" Clara grabbed his arm. "Stop!" Victor touched his bleeding lip, his eyes burning with rage. "You'll regret that, Drifter." "Maybe." Ethan stepped forward. "But you'll regret it more if you don't walk out that door right now." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Victor laughed a cold, ugly sound. "This isn't over, Clara. Your new protector can't watch you forever." He straightened his jacket and walked out, leaving chaos in his wake. Mrs. Patterson was already bustling around, clucking about the mess. Other diners whispered behind their hands. Clara stood frozen, her face white as chalk. "Who was that?" Ethan's voice was harder than he intended. "Nobody." "Clara." "Not here." She grabbed her shawl and headed for the door. "Please, not here." They walked in silence until they reached her cabin. Clara didn't stop at the door. She kept going around the back to a small bench overlooking her garden. She sat. Ethan sat beside her. "Victor Crane," Clara said finally, "was supposed to be my future." Ethan waited. "I met him 2 years after the cholera. I was still living with Martha, still learning, still fragile." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He was charming, wealthy. He said all the right things. Made me feel like I wasn't just the orphan girl everyone pitied." "What happened?" "He proposed. I almost said yes." Her voice cracked. "But Martha didn't trust him. Said there was something wrong behind his eyes. I thought she was just being protective." "She wasn't." "No, she wasn't." Clara's hands tightened on her arms. "I found out he had debts, gambling debts, and a temper he hid very well. He didn't want to marry me because he loved me. He wanted to marry me because Martha's cabin was worth money, and he thought he could control me." Rage simmered in Ethan's chest. Did he hurt you? Not physically. But when I refused him... She shuddered. He made my life hell for months. Spread rumors. Told everyone I was loose immoral, that I'd let him on. Half the town believed him. And you stayed? Martha was dying. I couldn't leave her. Clara's voice broke. And after she was gone, I had nowhere else to go, so I stayed. And eventually Victor left. Found some other town to terrorize. I thought I'd never see him again. Ethan reached for her hand. She let him take it. What does he want now? I don't know. Fear flickered in her green eyes. But Victor doesn't do anything without a reason. If he's back... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The news spread through Dry Creek like wildfire. Ethan heard the whispers at the double bar the next morning, saw the sidelong glances from the other ranch hands. By noon, Tom Garrett pulled him aside. You punched Victor Crane. Yes, sir. In front of half the town. Yes, sir. Garrett studied him for a long moment. Good. Man needed punching years ago. He spat into the dirt. But you need to watch your back now. Crane's got money and connections. He doesn't forget slights. I can handle myself. I don't doubt that. It's Clara I'm worried about. Garrett's weathered face softened. That girl's been through enough. Don't let your temper make things worse for her. The words stung because they were true. Ethan had acted on instinct, protecting Clara in the moment. He hadn't thought about the consequences. He never thought about consequences anymore. That was part of the problem. What do you know about Crane? Ethan asked. Enough to know he's dangerous. Made his money in mining speculation, some of it legal, most of it not. Came through here about 4 years back, sniffing around for opportunities. Garrett's jaw tightened. Found Clara instead. She told me some of it. She tell you about the fire? Ethan's blood went cold. What fire? Martha's barn. Burned down 3 months before she died. Everyone said it was an accident, knocked over lantern dry hay. Garrett met his eyes. But Martha told my wife she saw a man riding away in the dark. A man on a horse she recognized as Crane's. He burned her barn. Can't prove it. Never could. But after that, Martha's health went downhill fast. Garrett shook his head. Some folks say the stress of it weakened her heart, made her vulnerable to the fever that took her. Ethan's hands curled into fists. And nobody did anything. What could we do? Crane was gone by then. And Clara was so lost in grief, we didn't want to add to her burden. Garrett placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. But now he's back. And I don't think it's a coincidence. What do you mean? I mean Clara's been paying off Martha's debts for 3 years. Almost done now. Another few months and that cabin's free and clear, worth a fair bit of money to the right buyer. Garrett's expression darkened. Crane always did have a nose for profit. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Victor hadn't returned for Clara. He'd returned for what she owned. I need to warn her. Go. I'll cover your work today. Garrett stepped back. And Cole. Whatever you did in that war, whatever's been eating at you, now's the time to decide what kind of man you want to be. Ethan didn't waste time responding. He was already running for his horse. Clara wasn't at her cabin. Ethan checked the garden, the barn, the small shed where she dried her herbs. Empty. All of it empty. Panic clawed at his throat. He forced it down, made himself think. Where would she go? What would she... The general store. She'd mentioned needing supplies. He rode into town at a gallop that drew stares and whispers. Let them stare. Let them whisper. All that mattered was finding her. She was standing outside the store, a basket in her arms, talking to a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Relief flooded through him so hard his knees nearly buckled. Clara. She turned surprised. Ethan, what's wrong? He dismounted and crossed to her in 3 long strides. We need to talk. Now. I'm in the middle of... Now. He took her arm, nodding a terse apology to the confused woman. Please. Something in his face must have convinced her. She let him lead her away from the main street down the narrow alley between the store and the blacksmith shop. "You're scaring me," Clara said. "What happened?" "Crane. He's not here for you. He's here for your land." Clara's face went blank. "What?" "The cabin. Martha's cabin. Garrett says you've almost paid off the debts. Once it's free and clear, it becomes valuable." Clara's voice was hollow. Of course. Of course that's what this is about. You need to be careful. He might try something. Force you to sell, or what, burn down another barn." Her laugh was bitter ugly. "I'm not stupid, Ethan. I knew Victor didn't come back because he missed my sparkling personality." "You knew," I suspected. She set down her basket, her hands trembling. "But I hoped I was wrong. I hoped maybe he'd changed or moved on or just forgotten about me." Her voice cracked. "Stupid. So stupid." "You're not stupid." "I am. I'm stupid and naive, and I keep believing the best in people even when they show me the worst." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Martha always said it was my greatest strength and my greatest weakness." Ethan pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, her sobs muffled by his shirt. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you. You can't protect me from everything." "I can try." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Why? Why do you even care? You barely know me." "I know enough." Do you know that I cry myself to sleep sometimes? That I pretend to be happy when I'm really terrified? That some days the only thing keeping me going is sheer stubbornness?" She was almost shouting now. "I'm not the sunny, laughing girl you think I am, Ethan. That's just the mask I wear so people don't see how broken I really am." "I know." She froze. "What?" "I know it's a mask. I've known since the mud pit." He cupped her face in his hands. "You were terrified, sinking, possibly dying, and you chose to laugh anyway. That's not naive or stupid. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." "It's not brave. It's just survival." "Same thing sometimes." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "You taught me that." Clara stared at him, her green eyes swimming. "Ethan!" "I'm not going anywhere." The words came out rough, fierce. "Crane can threaten whatever he wants. I'm not leaving you to face him alone. You might have to, if he—" "I won't. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Because leaving you would be worse than anything he could do to me." She kissed him, not gently, like the first time. This kiss was desperate, hungry tasting of salt tears and fear, and something that might have been hope. Ethan pulled her closer, losing himself in the warmth of her, the realness of her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed, a real laugh this time, fragile but genuine. "Well," she said, "that's one way to end an argument." "I wasn't arguing. You were being noble and protective. Same thing." She straightened her dress color, returning to her cheeks. "So what do we do now?" "Now we find out what Crane is planning." The answer came faster than either of them expected. 2 days later, Clara received a letter. Ethan was there when she opened it, watching her face cycle through confusion, then disbelief, then cold fury. "What is it?" She handed him the letter without a word. The language was formal, legal. But the message was clear. Victor Crane had purchased Clara's debt from the bank in Santa Fe. The remaining balance was now due in full within 30 days. Failure to pay would result in forfeiture of the property. "He can't do this." Ethan's voice shook with rage. "This isn't legal." "It's perfectly legal. The debt was owed to the bank. Banks can sell debts. Victor bought mine." Clara's voice was flat dead. "He must have planned this for months, maybe years. How much do you owe?" $247. Ethan calculated quickly. His savings, his wages from the double bar, it wasn't enough. Not even close. "I can ask Garrett for an advance." No. Clara shook her head firmly. I won't let you go into debt for me. Clara. I mean it, Ethan. This is my problem. My debt. My failure. It's not failure. It is. Her composure cracked. I should have worked harder, saved more, not spent money on seeds for the garden or fabric for new dresses or... She pressed her hands to her face. I was so close. 3 more months and I would have been free. Ethan took her hands, pulling them away from her face. We'll figure this out. How I don't have the money. You don't have the money, and Victor knows it. Her voice turned bitter. He's been waiting for this moment, waiting until I was almost free so he could snatch it away. There has to be something we can do. There is. Clara met his eyes, and the resignation there made his stomach drop. I can sell. Not to Victor, to someone else. Cut my losses before he can take everything. You can't. This is your home. It's just a building, Ethan. Martha's gone. The memories aren't in the walls. But her voice trembled as she said it. I'll find somewhere else. Start over. I've done it before. And I'll come with you. She shook her head. You have a job here. A life you're building. I won't let you throw that away. It's not throwing away if I'm choosing... Stop. She pulled her hands free. Just stop. Let me think. Let me figure out what to do without you trying to save me every 5 minutes. The words hit like a slap. Ethan stepped back. I'm sorry. Clara's face crumpled. I didn't mean I just need... space. I understand. He forced the words past the tightness in his throat. I'll go. Ethan? It's fine. You know where to find me when you're ready. He walked out before she could respond, before he could say something he'd regret, before he could beg her to let him help in a way that would only push her further away. The bullet in his pouch had never felt heavier. Skeptical. 3 days passed with no word from Clara. Ethan threw himself into work at the double bar, pushing his body until exhaustion drowned out the voices in his head. The other hands gave him wide berth, sensing the barely contained violence simmering beneath his surface. On the 4th day, Tom Garrett found him repairing a fence with more force than necessary. You're going to break that post if you keep hammering like that. Ethan didn't stop. It'll hold. I heard about Crane's letter. The hammer paused mid-swing. How? Small town. Everyone knows everyone's business. Garrett leaned against the fence. Clara came to see my wife yesterday. Asked if she knew anyone who might want to buy her cabin. Ethan's chest tightened. Did she find anyone? Margaret told her to wait. Said something might turn up. Something like what? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. There's a way to stop Crane. But you're not going to like it. Tell me. Marry her. Ethan's hammer hit the fence post at the wrong angle, sending splinters flying. What? Think about it. If Clara's married, her property becomes her husband's responsibility. Crane can't force a foreclosure on a married woman's land without going through her husband first. It would tie things up in courts for years more trouble than it's worth. You want me to marry her to save her cabin. I want you to marry her because you're clearly in love with her and too stubborn to admit it. Garrett's voice softened. The cabin's just a bonus. Ethan stared at the broken fence post. She'd never agree. She barely wants to talk to me right now. Maybe, maybe not. But isn't she worth the risk? The question hung in the air long after Garrett walked away. Ethan found Clara at the creek. She was sitting on a rock near the bank, far from the mud pool where they'd met, but close enough that the memory hung between them like smoke. You're a hard woman to find, he said. I wasn't hiding. She didn't look at him. Just thinking. About the cabin. About everything. She finally turned and he saw the dark circles under her eyes, the drawn lines around her mouth. I've made a decision. Ethan's heart stopped. What decision? I'm going to give Victor what he wants. You can't. I don't have a choice. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. He's offered to buy the cabin for twice what it's worth. more than enough to pay off the debt and start fresh somewhere else. Clara, if you sell to him, he wins. He's already won, Ethan. The moment he bought that debt, he won. She stood brushing dirt from her skirt. I'm just deciding how much of myself I'm willing to lose in the fight. What if there was another way? There isn't. What if there was? He stepped closer. What if I could stop him? How? By punching him again, by threatening him. She shook her head. Victor has money connections, lawyers. We have nothing. We have each other. That's not enough. It could be. His voice cracked. Marry me. Clara went completely still. What? Marry me. If we're married, Crane can't touch your property without going through me. The courts would take years to sort it out. He'd give up before then. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Ethan, you don't just ask someone to marry you to solve a legal problem. That's not the only reason. She stared at him. What? The legal part that's just convenient. An excuse. He stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in her throat. The real reason is that I can't imagine my life without you in it. You barely know me. I know that you laugh when you should cry. I know that you choose joy even when it hurts. I know that you're the bravest, most stubborn, most infuriating woman I've ever met. His voice dropped. And I know that before I found you in that mud, I was ready to die. You made me want to live again, Clara. That's worth more than knowing your favorite color or what books you like to read. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Ethan, you don't have to say yes. You don't even have to answer right now. But I needed you to know. He took her hands. I'm not asking you to marry me to save your cabin. I'm asking you to marry me because the alternative, watching you walk away losing you, that's a kind of death I can't survive. Clara's breath caught. What about the bullet? What? The bullet in your pouch, the one you were looking at that morning in the barn. Her eyes searched his face. Are you still carrying it? Ethan's hand moved to his belt. The familiar weight was there as always, a constant companion for 3 years. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled out the leather pouch, loosened the drawstring, tipped the bullet into his palm. I don't need this anymore, he said quietly, and he threw it into the creek. The tiny splash seemed impossibly loud. Clara watched the water close over the spot where it disappeared, her hand pressed to her mouth. Oh, Ethan. Marry me. Yes. The word came out strangled, broken. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her with everything he had, every year of loneliness, every mile of running, every moment of despair that had led him to this woman, this place, this impossible second chance. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was laughing through her tears. We're insane, she said. Completely, absolutely insane. Probably. Everyone will think we're only doing this because of Victor. Let them think what they want. My cabin's barely worth fighting for. I'm not fighting for your cabin. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm fighting for you. The wedding was 3 days later. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony in his small church with Tom and Margaret Garrett as witnesses. Clara wore her yellow dress, the same one from their first dinner, and carried a bouquet of herbs from her garden. Rosemary for remembrance, she explained, lavender for devotion, and sage for wisdom, because we're clearly going to need it. Ethan wore his cleanest shirt and the boots he'd bought on their first unofficial date. His hands shook as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, a simple gold band he'd traded his cavalry insignia to buy. I now pronounce you man and wife. When Ethan kissed his bride, the small congregation burst into applause. Clara laughed against his mouth, that bright sound he'd fallen in love with in a mud pit 6 weeks ago. Well, Mrs. Cole? He grinned down at her. Now what? Now we go tell Victor Crane to go to hell. They found Crane at the saloon. He was holding court at a corner table surrounded by men who looked like they'd been hired for muscle rather than conversation. His eyes narrowed when Ethan and Clara walked through the door hand in hand. Mrs. Whitmore? His voice dripped false courtesy. What brings you to this establishment? It's Mrs. Cole now, actually. Clara lifted her left hand, letting the gold band catch the light. As of about an hour ago. Crane's face went blank. I'm sorry. You heard her. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Clara and the table. She's my wife, which means her property is now my concern. That's inconvenient. For you, maybe. For us, it's just getting started. Ethan pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This is a letter from Judge Patterson in Santa Fe. He's agreed to review the circumstances of your debt purchase. Seems there are some questions about proper procedures. You're bluffing, am I? Ethan let his smile turn cold. You bought Clara's debt under false pretenses, used insider information from the bank. The judge is very interested in examining the details. Crane's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of rage quickly controlled. Even if that were true, it would take months for any review. Exactly. Months during which you can't touch her property. Ethan tucked the letter back into his pocket. How long can you afford to wait, Crane? How many other debts are calling in favors while you're stuck here chasing a cabin that's worth less than your monthly gambling losses? The blow landed. Ethan saw it in the tightening around Crane's eyes, the white-knuckled grip on his whiskey glass. This isn't over. No, but it's postponed, and that's all we need. Ethan turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Crane. If you come near my wife again, I won't just break your jaw. I'll break everything you have. They walked out into the afternoon sun, Clara's hand tight in his. Is that letter real? She whispered. The letter's real. The judge is real. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whether he'll actually rule in our favor is another question. So we're still in danger. We're married. That buys us time. And then... He stopped walking and turned to face her. And then we build something stronger than Victor Crane's greed. A life. A home. A future he can't touch. Clara searched his face. You really believe we can do that? I believe you taught me that happiness is a choice. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'm choosing it. Every day. With you. She kissed him right there in the middle of the street with half the town watching. Let them watch. Let them gossip. Let Victor Crane hear about the bride who kissed her groom like the world was ending, because in that moment, a different world was beginning. 2 weeks passed in fragile peace. Ethan moved into Clara's cabin, their cabin now. They fell into a rhythm: early mornings with coffee and conversation, long days of work, quiet evenings tangled together in front of the fire. Clara taught him about herbs. He taught her to shoot. They argued about cooking and laughed about their terrible first meal, and slowly, carefully built the foundation of something real. But the storm was still coming. It arrived on a Tuesday. Ethan was working at the double bar when one of the other hands came running, breathless and pale. Cole, you need to get to town, now. What happened? It's your wife. There's been an accident. He didn't remember the ride, didn't remember the faces he passed, the shouts that followed him. His whole world had narrowed to a single point: Clara. He found her in front of the general store, sitting on the ground, surrounded by broken glass and scattered supplies. Her arm was bleeding, her face was white. Clara! He dropped to his knees beside her. What happened? I'm fine. But her voice shook. Just clumsy. Drop the lamp oil. Her arm needs stitching, Mrs. Patterson said grimly. And she won't go to the doctor. Can't afford it. Clara's jaw set stubbornly. I'll stitch it myself. Like hell you will. Ethan scooped her up, ignoring her protests. We're going. Ethan put me down. No. He carried her all the way to Dr. Morrison's office, deaf to her arguments, blind to the stares. The wound was deep, a jagged cut that ran from wrist to elbow. How did this happen? The doctor asked as he cleaned the wound. I told you. The lamp oil bottle slipped and cut her in a perfect straight line. Dr. Morrison's voice was dry. Try again, Mrs. Cole. Clara went silent. Ethan felt ice form in his chest. Clara, what really happened? Nothing. Clara. She closed her eyes. Victor's men. They caught me outside the store. One of them had a knife. The ice turned to fire. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd do something stupid. She opened her eyes and they were fierce despite the pain. I'm fine, Ethan. It's just a cut. They hurt you. They warned me. There's a difference. Her voice dropped. They said if we don't drop the case with the judge, the next cut won't be on my arm. Ethan stood so fast his chair crashed backward. Where are they? Ethan. Where? I don't know. They disappeared. Rode off before anyone could stop them. Dr. Morrison finished the stitching in heavy silence. Ethan paced the small office like a caged wolf, rage boiling in his veins. This isn't over, Clara said quietly. You know that. I know. Victor's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. Then we stop him first. How? She sat up carefully, cradling her bandaged arm. He has money. He has men. What do we have? Ethan crossed to her, knelt beside the examination table, took her uninjured hand in both of his. We have each other. We have this town people who care about you, who remember what Crane did before. His voice hardened. And we have me, a man who spent 8 years learning how to survive against impossible odds. Ethan, I didn't tell you everything about the war, about what I did. His throat tightened. I was a scout, which meant I went into enemy territory alone, gathered information, sometimes eliminated threats. Clara's eyes widened. You mean? I've faced men like Crane before. Men who think money and muscle make them untouchable. He met her gaze without flinching. They're wrong. What are you going to do? Whatever I have to. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. But first, I'm taking you home. And then, I'm going to find Tom Garrett. We're going to end this, Clara. One way or another, we're going to end this. Tom Garrett listened to Ethan's plan without interrupting. When Ethan finished, the older man was silent for a long moment. Then he reached under his desk and pulled out a worn leather satchel. I've been waiting for someone to have the guts to do this. He opened the satchel and spread its contents across the desk. 3 years of evidence, witness statements, bank records, everything I could gather on Victor Crane. Ethan stared at the papers. Why didn't you use this before? Because I didn't have proof that would stick. And because Clara asked me not to. Garrett's jaw tightened. After Martha died, she just wanted him gone, said revenge wouldn't bring her back. And now? Now he's threatened her life. Now he's drawn blood. Garrett's eyes were hard as flint. Now it's personal. They worked through the night, piecing together the story hidden in Garrett's documents. Victor Crane wasn't just a gambling man with expensive tastes. He was part of a network of land speculators who bought up debts, forced foreclosures, and flipped properties to railroad companies at enormous profit. He's done this before, Ethan said, studying a list of names. These families, all of them lost their land within months of Crane arriving in their towns. 12 families that I know of. Probably more. Garrett pointed to a letter near the bottom of the pile. That's from a lawyer in Denver. One of Crane's victims tried to fight back. Ended up dead in an alley 3 days before the trial. Ethan's blood ran cold. He killed someone. Can't prove it, but the timing speaks for itself. Then we're not just fighting for Clara's cabin. We're fighting for everyone he's ever hurt. That's a big fight, Cole. I've fought bigger. Ethan met Garrett's eyes. And I've never had this much to lose. Dawn was breaking when Ethan returned to the cabin. Clara was waiting on the porch, her bandaged arm cradled against her chest. She stood when she saw him, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. You're alive. Did you think I wouldn't be? I didn't know what to think. You were gone all night. Her voice cracked. I kept imagining. He crossed the porch in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. I'm here. I'm fine. And I have a plan. What kind of plan? The kind that ends with Victor Crane behind bars. He led her inside, spreading Garrett's documents across their small table. He's not just a gambler, Clara. He's a predator. He's been doing this for years, targeting vulnerable families, stealing their land. Clara's hands trembled as she examined the papers. All these people lost everything, just like you almost did. Ethan's voice hardened. But we can stop him. Garrett has enough evidence to send him to prison for years. We just need to get it to the right people. The judge in Santa Fe. Better. There's a federal marshal passing through Albuquerque next week. Garrett has a contact who can arrange a meeting. He took her hands. If we can get this evidence to him, Crane won't be able to buy his way out. And if Crane finds out what we're planning, the question hung in the air like smoke. Then we deal with that too. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Garrett gathered the rest of his evidence. Ethan made quiet inquiries around town, identifying which of Crane's men were hired muscle and which might be persuaded to talk. Clara, despite her injury, threw herself into organizing the documents, her sharp mind finding connections that both men had missed. Look at this. She pointed to a series of bank transfers. Every time Crane bought a debt, there was a matching deposit to this account in Kansas City. Someone's been paying him to target specific properties. The railroad? Ethan asked. Has to be. These dates match up with the route surveys for the Santa Fe line. Clara's eyes widened. He's not just a land speculator, he's a railroad agent. They pay him to clear the way. It was the missing piece. The connection that turned a collection of suspicious activities into a pattern of criminal conspiracy. This changes everything, Garrett said grimly. We're not just taking down Crane. We're exposing railroad corruption. Is that good or bad? Depends on how you look at it. Good because it means bigger consequences if we succeed. Bad because it means more powerful enemies. Ethan looked at Clara. It's your call. We can still walk away. Take this evidence and disappear before anyone gets hurt. No. Her voice was steel. Those families, the ones he destroyed, they deserve justice. We all deserve justice. She reached for his hand. I'm tired of running, Ethan. I'm tired of letting men like Victor Crane win because they're rich and we're scared. Then we fight. Then we fight. The night before they planned to leave for Albuquerque, Crane made his move. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, shouting Clara's name, stumbling through darkness that had turned orange and acrid. Ethan! Her voice came from the bedroom. I can't. The door? The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. Ethan grabbed a blanket, soaked it in the water basin, and wrapped it around his arm. The bedroom door was hot to the touch, the wood already buckling. He threw his shoulder against it. Once, twice, 3 times before it gave way. Clara was pressed against the far wall, coughing, her eyes streaming. He grabbed her and dragged her toward the window, smashing the glass with his elbow. Go, I'm right behind you. She climbed through, tumbling into the garden. Ethan followed just as the ceiling beams began to groan. They ran. Behind them, the cabin. Clara's cabin. Martha's cabin collapsed in on itself with a sound like thunder. Flames shot into the night sky, illuminating the figure watching from horseback at the edge of the property. Victor Crane. Ethan started toward him, but Clara grabbed his arm. Don't. That's what he wants. He just burned our home, and if you attack him now, he'll claim self-defense. It'll be your word against his, and he has witnesses. She pointed to the shadows where Crane's men lurked. We stick to the plan, Ethan. The evidence is gone. His voice was hollow. It was all in the cabin. Clara's face went white. No. Everything. Garrett's documents, the bank records, everything we gathered. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. It's all gone. Crane's laughter echoed across the darkness. Such a tragedy. A lamp knocked over in the night. Happens all the time in these old cabins. He tipped his hat and rode away, his men following like shadows. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, staring at the flames that consumed everything she had left of Martha, of her old life, of her future. Ethan knelt beside her. Clara, it's over. Her voice was dead. He won, just like he always wins. No. Yes. We have nothing now. No home. No evidence. No. We have copies. She went still. What? I made copies. 2 days ago while you were sleeping. He pulled her to face him. I've survived too long to keep all my weapons in one place. The copies are with Garrett in his safe. Crane doesn't know they exist. Hope flickered in Clara's eyes, fragile as candlelight. Ethan! This isn't over. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's broken us. Ethan's jaw set hard. He's wrong.
So what?
They spent the night in Garrett's barn, wrapped in horse blankets, holding each other against the cold and the grief. I keep thinking about Martha's garden, Clara whispered. The herbs she planted. The lavender she brought all the way from Virginia. Gone. All of it gone. We'll plant a new garden. It won't be the same. No, it won't. Ethan tightened his arms around her. But it'll be ours. Yours and mine. Built from what we choose to grow, not what we lost. She was quiet for a long moment. Ethan? Yeah. I'm scared. Me too. You don't seem scared. I'm terrified. He pressed his lips to her hair. But I've spent 8 years being scared alone. Being scared with you is better. She laughed, a broken, exhausted sound, but real. That might be the strangest compliment anyone's ever given me. I'll work on my poetry. Please don't. But she was smiling now, just a little. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we ride for Albuquerque. Garrett will stay here, keep Crane distracted, make him think we've given up. He traced circles on her back. By the time he realizes what we've done, it'll be too late. And if he catches us before we get there, then I do what I have to do to protect you. Ethan. I mean it, Clara. Whatever it takes. She pulled back to look at him, her green eyes searching his face in the dim light. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't sacrifice yourself. Promise me you won't become the man you were running from. The words hit him like a physical blow. I can't promise that. You have to. Because if you become a killer for me, if you do something you can't come back from, then he wins anyway. Her hands cupped his face. I need you whole, Ethan. I need you alive and whole, and here with me, not haunted by more ghosts. His throat tightened. What if there's no other way? There's always another way. You taught me that. She pressed her forehead to his. We choose who we become. Every day, every moment. Don't let Victor Crane choose for you. They left before dawn. The ride to Albuquerque was 3 days of hard travel, pushing the horses as fast as they dared. Every hoofbeat behind them made Ethan reach for his revolver. Every stranger on the road could be one of Crane's men. Clara never complained. Not about the pace, not about her still healing arm, not about the fear that dogged their every step. She rode beside him with her jaw set and her eyes forward, and Ethan fell in love with her all over again. They made camp the second night in a canyon that offered some protection from the wind. Clara built a small fire while Ethan took first watch. I've been thinking, she said, poking at the flames with a stick, about what comes after. After what? After we take down Crane. After the marshals have their evidence. She looked up at him. What do we do then? I hadn't thought that far ahead. Neither had I. Not really. She set down the stick. But I think I'd like to go somewhere new, start fresh, build something that isn't tied to grief and ghosts. Where? I don't know. California maybe, Oregon, somewhere with rain and green things. A wistful smile crossed her face. Martha always talked about seeing the ocean before she died. She never got the chance. Then we'll see it for her. Clara's breath caught. You'd do that, leave New Mexico. I'd go anywhere with you. The words came out simple, unadorned. True. Home isn't a place anymore, Clara. It's wherever you are. She crossed to him, curling into his side as they watched the stars wheel overhead. Mrs. Cole, She tried out the name like tasting wine. Clara Cole. It sounds strange. Good strange or bad strange? I'm not sure yet. She tipped her face up to kiss him softly. Ask me again in 50 years. They reached Albuquerque on the evening of the third day. The town was larger than Dry Creek, busy with railroad workers and merchants and travelers passing through. Garrett's contact had arranged for them to meet the federal marshal at a boarding house near the edge of town. Marshal Thomas Reed was a lean man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He listened to their story without interrupting, examined the evidence without expression. When Ethan finished talking, the silence stretched for an eternity. "This is serious," Reed said finally. "You're accusing a man of fraud, arson, possibly murder, and you're implicating the railroad in conspiracy." "I know what I'm accusing him of." "Do you know what happens if you're wrong?" "We're not wrong." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pale face. "Victor Crane destroyed my mentor's barn. He drove her into an early grave. He burned my home with me inside it and would have watched me die." Her chin lifted. "I don't care what happens to me. I care about making sure he can't do this to anyone else." Reed studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his weathered face, something that might have been respect. "There's a judge in Santa Fe, honest man, one of the few who can't be bought." He gathered the documents carefully. "I'll see that he gets these, and I'll have my men pick up Crane before he can run." "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. Reed's expression softened slightly. "You two should stay hidden until this is over. Crane's going to be desperate once he realizes what's happening." "We can do that. I mean really hidden. No contact with anyone from your town. No letters, no messages." Reed's voice was hard. "Crane has eyes everywhere. If he finds you before we find him..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan found a small cabin outside town owned by a widow who asked no questions and accepted payment in advance. They holed up there watching the road, jumping at every sound. 5 days passed. On the 6th day, Garrett's message came. It was brief, scrawled in a shaking hand. "They got him, arrested this morning. He's talking, implicating everyone. It's over. Come home." Clara read it 3 times before the words sank in. "It's over." Her voice was disbelieving. "Just like that. Just like that. I don't..." She sat down heavily on the bed. "I don't know what to feel." "Me neither." Ethan sat beside her. "I keep waiting for something else to happen, for Crane to escape or the charges to be dropped or for the other shoe to fall." "Yeah." They sat in silence, shoulders touching, trying to absorb the impossible they had won. Against money, against power, against a man who had destroyed a dozen families before them, they had won. "Ethan." "Yeah, I want to go home." Clara's voice cracked. "I know there's nothing left. I know the cabin's gone. But I want to see it anyway. I want to..." She struggled for words. "I want to say goodbye." "Then we'll go. And after that..." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "After that, we build something new." The ride back to Dry Creek took 4 days. Neither of them rushed. After weeks of fear and running and fighting for their lives, the slow pace felt like a gift. They stopped when they wanted, talked when they felt like it, and let the silence fill the spaces between words. On the second night, Clara told Ethan about her brothers. Daniel was the oldest. He wanted to be a preacher, used to practice sermons on the chickens. Her voice was soft, remembering. Samuel was 2 years younger than me. He could make anyone laugh, even my father, who never smiled. What happened to them? Daniel went first, then Samuel, then my mother. She stared into the campfire. My father lasted the longest. 3 weeks of watching everyone he loved die one by one. I'm sorry. Don't be. They're not suffering anymore. She looked at him with those green eyes that had seen too much. That's what I tell myself on the hard days. They're together. They're at peace. And one day I'll see them again. You believe that? I have to. Her smile was sad but real. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Ethan thought about the men he'd watched die in the war. The friends he'd buried in shallow graves. The faces that still visited him in dreams. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe that's what keeps us going. It's not the only thing. Clara reached across the fire to take his hand. Hope helps, love helps, having something to live for. And you have that. I have you. She squeezed his fingers. That's enough. They crested the final hill on the afternoon of the fourth day. Dry Creek spread out below them, familiar and strange at the same time. Everything looked the same, the crooked church steeple, the dusty main street, the scatter of buildings that made up the only home Clara had known for 7 years. Everything except the charred remains where her cabin had stood. Clara pulled her horse to a stop, staring at the blackened ground. Ethan watched her face, waiting for the tears, the breakdown, the grief he knew must be coming. Instead, she took a deep breath. It's smaller than I remembered. What is the loss? She urged her horse forward. When we left, it felt like the whole world had burned. But looking at it now, she shook her head. It's just wood and stone, just things. The important parts are still here. The important parts? You, me, the life we're going to build. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear, peaceful. Martha always said that home isn't where you live, it's who you live for. They rode down into town together. The welcome was overwhelming. Half of Dry Creek had gathered in front of the general store, word of their return, spreading faster than wildfire. Tom and Margaret Garrett pushed through the crowd, Margaret already crying. Tom's weathered face split in the widest grin Ethan had ever seen. You did it. Garrett grabbed Ethan's hand, pumping it hard enough to rattle teeth. The marshal's men took Crane 3 days ago. He's in federal custody in Santa Fe. We heard. What you didn't hear is that he's talking. Giving up names left and right, railroad men, bank officials, politicians. Garrett's voice dropped. This goes higher than any of us imagined. They're saying it might reach all the way to Washington. Clara's hand found Ethan's. Is it really over? The Crane part is. The rest. Garrett shrugged. That's for the lawyers and politicians to sort out. But for you two, yeah, it's over. Mrs. Patterson appeared with a plate of her famous pie. Mrs. Henderson brought a basket of bread. Dr. Morrison offered free medical care for Clara's arm. One by one, the people of Dry Creek came forward with gifts, with gratitude, with welcome. I don't understand, Clara whispered to Ethan. Why are they being so kind? Because you stood up. When everyone else was too scared to fight, you stood up. He pulled her close. That means something. We stood up. Both of us. Yeah. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Both of us. The Garretts insisted they stay in the ranch's guest room until they could rebuild. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Clara finally broke down. Ethan held her while she sobbed great heaving cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She cried for Martha, for her family, for the cabin that had been her sanctuary. She cried for the years of loneliness and the weeks of terror, and the future she'd been so afraid to hope for. When the tears finally stopped, she lay exhausted in his arms, her face swollen, her breath still hitching. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For falling apart. You must think I think you're the strongest person I've ever known. He smoothed her hair back from her damp face. And I think even strong people need to cry sometimes. Do you cry, I mean? The question surprised him. Not for a long time. Maybe you should. Maybe. He thought about all the grief he'd been carrying. The guilt. The shame. The weight of years spent running from himself. Maybe someday. When you're ready, I'll be here. Clara's hand found his cheek. That's what this is, Ethan. being here for each other, through the good parts and the hard parts and everything in between. I know. Do you? Because sometimes I think you're still waiting for me to leave, still expecting me to realize I made a mistake and disappear. The words cut because they were true. Old habits, he said roughly. Then let's make new ones. She pulled his face down to hers. Starting now. She kissed him with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. And in that kiss, Ethan felt something shift, some final wall crumbling, some last resistance giving way. He kissed her back with everything he had. They broke ground on the new cabin a week later. The whole town turned out to help. Tom Garrett brought lumber from the double bar's surplus. The blacksmith donated nails. Mrs. Patterson organized a steady stream of meals for the workers. I don't know how to repay all of you, Clara said, overwhelmed. You already have. Margaret Garrett pressed a handkerchief into her hands. You showed us that standing up to evil isn't just possible, it's necessary. That's worth more than any cabin. The frame went up in 3 days. The walls followed. By the end of the second week, they had a roof and 4 solid walls and a door that actually closed properly. Ethan stood back to survey their work, sweat dripping down his face muscles, aching in the best possible way. It's not much to look at, he admitted. It's perfect. Clara slipped her hand into his. It's ours. Still need furniture, and a proper stove, and we have time. She leaned her head against his shoulder. We have all the time in the world. Spring arrived with wildflowers and warm rain. Clara replanted her garden working from memory and the few seeds Margaret had saved from Martha's original plants. Lavender went in the south corner, yarrow near the well, feverfew by the back door. It won't be the same as Martha's, she said, kneeling in the fresh-turned earth. No. Ethan handed her another seedling. It'll be better. She looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes bright. How do you know? Because Martha's garden was about survival, about getting through the hard years alone. He crouched beside her. This garden is about building, about growing, about choosing to put down roots. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. He kissed her forehead. Stubborn woman. Laughs at inappropriate times. Makes terrible beans. My beans are improving. Your beans are still terrible. She threw a clump of dirt at him, laughing, and the sound echoed across the garden like music. Summer came, and with it news. Victor Crane had been convicted. 20 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy and a dozen other charges that had emerged as more victims came forward. The railroad executives who had funded his schemes were under investigation. The corrupt bank officials had been removed. It's done, Clara said, reading the letter from Marshall Reed. It's really done. How do you feel? I don't know. She set the letter aside. I thought I'd feel victorious, or relieved, or something. And instead, I just feel tired. She looked at him with something like wonder. Is that strange? We won. We beat him. And all I can think about is how much I want to take a nap. Ethan laughed a real laugh, full and warm. That's not strange. That's normal. You've been fighting for so long your body doesn't know what to do with peace. What about you? What do you do with peace? I'm still figuring that out. He pulled her into his arms. But I think it involves a lot of this. Holding me, being still, being present, being here instead of somewhere in my head reliving the past. He rested his chin on her hair. You taught me that. I taught you how to be present. You taught me that the present is worth being in. Fall brought the harvest and a surprise. Clara fainted in the garden. Ethan found her collapsed between the rosemary and the sage, her face pale, her pulse racing. He carried her to the cabin, shouting for help, his heart pounding with a terror he hadn't felt since the night of the fire. Dr. Morrison came within the hour. The examination felt like it lasted forever. Ethan paced outside the bedroom door, wearing a path in the new wooden floor, imagining every worst-case scenario. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was unreadable. "Is she—" Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. "She's fine." Morrison's stern expression cracked into something like a smile. "Better than fine, actually." "Then why did she faint?" "Because she's pregnant, you fool." The world stopped spinning. "Pregnant?" "About 3 months along by my estimate." Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations, Cole. You're going to be a father." Ethan's knees gave out. He sat down hard on the nearest chair, his mind blank, his heart racing for entirely different reasons now. A father. Him. The man who'd spent 8 years running from life. The man who'd carried a bullet meant for his own heart. "Ethan." Clara appeared in the doorway, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. "Are you all right?" "I'm—" He looked up at her, this woman who'd laughed in the mud, who'd chosen joy over despair, who'd loved him despite everything. "I'm going to be a father." "You are." Her smile was tremulous. Is that okay?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, falling to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach. "That's everything," he said, his voice breaking. "That's everything I never knew I wanted." Clara's fingers threaded through his hair. "You're crying." "I know. You never cry. Maybe I should have started sooner." They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling together in their small cabin, crying and laughing, and holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck who had finally found shore. The baby came in the spring, a girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Martha after the woman who had taught Clara how to survive, how to heal, how to love again. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, watching Ethan hold their daughter for the first time. "She's terrifying." His voice was awed reverent. "How is something so small, so terrifying?" "Because she's ours, because we're responsible for her." Clara reached over to touch Martha's tiny hand. "Because we have to teach her everything we know. We'll teach her to laugh." Ethan looked up at his wife. "When she's sad, when she's scared, when the world feels too heavy, we'll teach her to laugh and to choose joy every single day." Years passed like pages turning in a book. Martha grew. Then came Daniel, named for Clara's oldest brother. Then Samuel, who had his namesake's gift for making anyone smile. The cabin expanded. Rooms were added. A proper barn went up. The garden that Clara had planted with trembling hands became a small farm, then a larger one supplying herbs and medicines to half the territory. Ethan's reputation grew too. The former drifter became known as a fair man, a hard worker, a voice of reason in disputes. When Tom Garrett retired, he recommended Ethan as his replacement at the double bar. "I don't know anything about running a ranch this size," Ethan protested. "You know how to work hard. You know how to be honest. You know how to stand up for what's right." Garrett gripped his hand. "Everything else you'll learn." He learned. The double bar prospered. Other ranches followed his example. Dry Creek grew from a collection of struggling buildings into a proper town with a school and a doctor's office and a town council that Ethan reluctantly agreed to chair. "You're important now," Clara teased him one evening. "A pillar of the community." "I'm a man who fell in love with a woman stuck in mud." He pulled her into his lap. "Everything else is just details." "Some details." She gestured at the house, the land, the children playing in the yard. "We've built quite a life, Ethan Cole. We've chosen quite a life." He kissed her softly. "Every day. Just like you taught me." 40 years after a drifter found a woman laughing in a mud pit, 2 old people rode to the creek where it all began. Clara's hair was silver, now her face lined with decades of sun and laughter. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he helped her dismount. Hands that had held children and grandchildren, that had built homes and buried friends, that had learned to be gentle after years of violence. "This is the spot," Clara said, looking at the mud pool that had long since dried up. "Right here. This is where you found me." "I remember." Ethan stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "You were waist-deep and laughing like you'd lost your mind." "I probably had. Temporarily." She smiled up at him. "But then this handsome stranger appeared and pulled me out, and I never lost it again." "Liar. You've definitely lost your mind a few times since then." "Only when you deserved it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the spot where their story had begun. "Ethan." "Yeah. Are you happy?" He thought about the question. Really thought about it the way Clara had taught him to examine his feelings instead of burying them. "I am," he said finally. "I don't think I knew what happiness was before you. I thought it was the absence of pain, the absence of fear." He took her hand, marveling at how familiar it felt after all these years. "But it's not an absence, it's a presence. It's choosing to be present every day, even when it's hard." "That's very philosophical for a former drifter. I learned from the best." He lifted her hand to his lips. "You taught me that joy isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose, over and over again, no matter what life throws at you." Clara's eyes glistened. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you pulled me out of my mud." He touched her face gently. "We saved each other, Clara. That's how it works." Is that our legacy, mutual salvation? Our legacy is Martha and Daniel and Samuel. Our legacy is their children and their children's children. His voice grew thick. Our legacy is showing them that no matter how dark the night gets, you can always choose the light. Clara leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her the way he had 1,000 times before. "I love you, Ethan Cole." "I love you, Clara Cole." He pressed his lips to her silver hair. "Today, tomorrow, every day I have left." They stood together as the sun set, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life worth living. Behind them, the land stretched out in all directions, land they had worked and fought for and raised a family on. Ahead of them, the future waited with whatever challenges and joys it held. And between them, in the space where their hearts had learned to beat together, lived the simple truth that had carried them through 4 decades of marriage. Happiness isn't given. It isn't earned. It isn't found. Happiness is chosen. Every morning when you wake up, every night before you sleep. Every moment you decide that joy is possible, even when the world insists it isn't. Clara had learned that lesson in the aftermath of cholera, holding her mother's hand as she died. Ethan had learned it in a mud pit, watching a woman laugh at her own misfortune. And together, they had taught it to everyone they loved. In a world full of pain and loss and cruelty, choosing joy is not naive. It is not foolish. It is not weakness. It is the bravest act of all.